All right, Abarigani. Part 5 for our deep dive into the Islam and the Arab trans-Sahara slave trade. I'm using Africa Rebirth source here, and then I'm going to use the Smithsonian as one of my latter sources. A explorer by the name of and a abolitionist by the name of David Livingston was critical in the abolishment of the Arab slave trade in Africa. But we'll get to David Livingston. Want to continue here. Over centuries, countless Africans from sub-Saharan Africa were captured in droves, marched across brutal landscapes, and traded as commodities in the bustling slave markets of Mecca, Cairo, Baghdad, Istanbul, etc. Many became laborers, sex slaves, eunuchs, concubines, or soldiers. Their identities erased as they were absorbed into foreign societies. Be right back. Again, I just covered that the Arabs mostly, they didn't want men, they wanted women. They wanted women mainly so they could serve as concubines, sexual slaves, and harems, and domestic slaves. The demand for female sex the demand for the female sex was so high that the Arab slave dealers would double their prices. This also meant more female slaves were captured, with the estimated ratio of captives being 3 women to 1 man. Be right back. Critical on the men were the male slaves, on the other hand. They were often castrated into eunuchs, a process which had less than a 10% survival rate. Over this period, over 10 million men, women, and children were trafficked through the Sahara Desert and over the Indian Ocean to the Arab world. These journeys were usually so brutal that skeletons were described as marking the trails these slave caravans trudged. Typically, the journey from Africa to the Mediterranean, the home of the Arabs, took months through the desert, which meant slaves would often suffer from exhaustion, extreme heat, and lack of water, which was made worse by their physically bound conditions. Consequently, many slaves succumbed to hunger, diseases, and thirst along the way, with estimates showing that about 50% of them never made it to the Mediterranean. Be right back. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention there was a major rebellion during this period of time of the Arab slave trade called the Zanj Rebellion. Happened between 868 and 883 CE. So you get a chance to look that up. Very critical. I won't go into that in depth right here. But the long-term impacts of the Arab slave trade, economic, social, and cultural. From Egypt to Zanzibar, Ghana, and Mali, it was evident that African societies operated civilized structures that enabled them to thrive. However, with the depletion of vital human resources, these societies began to degrade until they became ghosts of what they once were. Zanzibar was a thriving hub for slave trade, but it did not foster any new economies, and so it went down. Other parts of Africa, the consistent depopulation of loss of labor and community made development impossible. Social structures had more impacted than any other, as their reproductive capacity needed to sustain any society became lacking across affected regions. This also meant the labor needed to build the continent's agriculture industry, which Africa had thrived on, was lacking. Fear and instability also pervaded the continent, as the fear of raids prevented inhabitants from building social cohesion and structure, leaving behind ghost villages and shattered families. African rulers, drawn by the wealth that slave trade brought, turned against their own people, selling captives to Arab merchants instead of investing in stable, long-term economic growth. Be right back. This point has to be made. The cultural impact was equally profound. Unlike the transatlantic slave trade, which led to the formation of the African diaspora communities in the Americas, the Arab slave trade often erased African identities through forced assimilation. Enslaved Africans were stripped of their names, languages, and traditions, absorbed into foreign societies where they had no claim to their past. Many were forcibly converted to Islam. Repeat, many were forcibly converted to Islam and integrated into households as concubines, servants, or soldiers with little acknowledgement of their African heritage. In many cases, African men were castrated, ensuring that their lineage ended with them. Be right back. These factors combined dramatically altered the continent's demographic, economic, and cultural landscape. By the early 20th century, the Arab slave trade officially came to an end, but its impact endures to today. Listen, You just I don't even know what to say. This is such compelling history. What we went through in the Arab slave trade. We talk about the transatlantic or the triangle trade. Gotta talk about this trans-Sahara, man. When I deal with the part six, we're gonna deal with some modern issues that's going on still with the Arab trade, some of the racial attitudes that the Arabs in countries like Libya, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and all have towards Africans that they enslaved and brought there. Then we're gonna go to the Smithsonian, their research, and deal with Mr. David Livingston and how he was one of the key abolitionists to try to rid the Arab slave trade out of Africa. See you on part six.